very excited to be introducing Amy Todman to do a talk for us. As we said in the beginning, Amy's been working with us on this conference since the very beginning, back in January. And she's been absolutely wonderful. She's the referendum curator here at the NLS, and I think that the work that she does is incredibly important. I'm sure that you'll agree, and something that not a lot is perhaps known about. I don't know that everyone in Scotland is fully aware of this work and how much it means to the way that we think about and preserve the cultural legacy of the referendum. So, as I said, Amy is the referendum curator, and in this role she works with colleagues across the library, as well as with a wide range of publishers and creators of content to identify, collect, preserve, and make available material in a range of formats, including published and unpublished material in print and digital format, websites, social media, moving image and sound, all that relate to the recent Scottish Independence Referendum. The way that she's able to collect ephemera is something that I know I find in particular very interesting. So she's going to talk a bit more about that. So please welcome Amy Todman.
Okay, is that good? No, I think that's that good. Can I put this down a bit? Yeah, okay, I'll try this. Right. Okay. So as Katie just mentioned, I'm Amy Todman, the referendum curator here at the National Library of Scotland. I'm going to talk for around 20-25 minutes and then welcome any questions. Hopefully we'll have time for a few. And I'd just like to thank Katie and Sarah for providing this incredible opportunity for discussion and reflection 1 year on. And it's also very good to see some of you who have worked with me to bring material into the collection here today. And of course, I would like to thank my colleagues at the National Library of Scotland for their support and invaluable assistance on this quite challenging project, and in particular Dr. Maria Costrillo, Curator of Political Manuscripts. Whilst I have the stage, and I have to do this, I might also mention that I'd be delighted to talk to anyone who thinks they might have anything for the referendum collection, so please come and talk to me at the end, or my contact details are on the last slide. So, I began in my role as referendum curator towards the end of May last year. In a way, my task was simple: to collect the documentary record of the Scottish Independence Referendum. In every other way, of course, it was not. The collection was to be unbiased, representative and inclusive, including publications in print and digital, analogue, born digital archives and records, moving image, sound, websites, social media streams. Collecting priorities for the project included national campaigning groups, political parties, trade unions, think tanks, research institutes, government, both UK and Scottish, religious organisations, charities and the third sector, as well as individuals. What had been recognised well before I came into the post was the complexity and energy behind this referendum campaign. What perhaps no one could have predicted was the sheer volume of creative participation that ensued. People were part of more traditional campaign groups, yes, but they were also pushing at the edges of those groups, speaking as individuals, creating new partnerships. Capturing the documentary record, whether that's a flyer, a tweet, or the papers of an organisation, cannot hope to adequately recreate that energy. And indeed, that's an almost impossible task. And yet we knew that it was important to capture, where possible, the many voices that spoke out during the campaign, and to try to show the creative participation that really became something at its centre. In doing so, there are a number of tensions that have and continue to be acknowledged and considered. Often these tensions are about the pace of production and the requirements of preservation. They are almost always about relations. Power relations, for example, between the National Library of Scotland and grassroots organisations or individuals, between different campaign groups, between individuals within communities involved with the referendum, and between myself and those who I've worked with to bring material into the collection. At the heart of all this has been a recognition of the inherently creative activity that drove the referendum campaign. And for us, these issues are part of much wider concerns about what seems to be a transitional moment in the production and preservation of what is produced. We are all record creators, such as yourselves and myself, as well as archivists and librarians, catching up with incredible changes to our social and professional lives, and the possibilities opened up by a world in which production and documenting is incredibly easy. The responsibility for preservation of this mass of data does not lie squarely with any one individual or organisation. Rather, this is necessarily a shared opportunity to rethink, better understand, and take a measure of control over the information that's all around us. So I don't think I'm giving anything away if I say that the referendum has posed many questions for us at the library. The struggle to keep up with the pace of material produced is a dictum that I'm intimately familiar with, and it is undoubtedly important. Much, by no means all, of this time sensitivity relates to digital and online material, an aspect of the collection that only grows in complexity when combined with the creative, fast pace and short timescale which characterises the event. The challenges presented to archives and libraries by the proliferation of digital and online material have by now been well documented. Similarly, there's been a wide recognition of the importance of an archival landscape that's representative of all of society, addressing what the late radical historian Howard Zinn has called a fundamental bias towards the most important and powerful people. Reader in Archival Studies at the University of College London, Andrew Flynn, has written recently about the relationship between these issues of online content and grassroots activity, noting the responsibility of the archivist to ensure that their collections more fully represent all within society, including the more transitory, often web-based material. Now, Flynn suggests that this requires archivists to step in proactively to identify and support the preservation of contemporary collections for future use. These issues and opportunities are central to the referendum collection. The referendum has certainly asked us to respond quickly to events as they unfold, requiring working together across traditional collecting and organisational boundaries, as well as prompting important conversations internally and externally about what, how and why we collect. Indeed, pace has been a concern from the outset, and not only speed, but the importance of reacting to many and overlapping rhythms of production and reflection as they've unfolded before, during and after the vote. While understanding the diverse aims of the many groups, individuals and alliances of the referendum, as they drew together, stepped apart and reformed in often new, short-lived partnerships, in a campaign as fast-paced as this was, is perhaps impossible for those on the outside, as formal archiving institutions inevitably are. On the other hand, in order to collect from such an event, a level of understanding and an ability to keep pace with what's happening is required. It's this balance between archive and event at a variety of paces that I want to consider today. So what is the referendum collection? So, we aim to build a collection that's unbiased, representative and inclusive of the complex angles surrounding the constitutional future of Scotland. The collection currently includes around 300 monographs, reports and official publications. So that's from the papers of the Yes Scotland campaign material, Better Together material, to one-off photocopied items where there's no indication of author, and everything in between. We have around 900 leaflets, flyers, posters and other ephemeral items, and we have a growing collection of film, sound and archival material that relates specifically to the referendum collection. Now, the collection fits comfortably within the library's existing collections of both print and unpublished material, perhaps most clearly with our strong political holdings, including the records of the Scottish political parties, as well as previous Home Rule and independence campaigns, as well as literary collections, including Alistair Gray, Kathleen Jamie and Ian Hamilton Finlay. When I've gone, and I will go, the referendum material will be findable through tagging added at cataloguing stage, and it should be obvious, but we want this to be a meaningful collection that's representative not just of the big campaign groups, but also the smaller groups and individuals that were such an important part of what happened last year. At this point, I'd just like to introduce All Back to Bowie's as a good example of the kinds of material that are forming part of the collection. As many, if not all of you will know, Bowie's was a daily lunchtime event that ran in Edinburgh as part of the Festival Fringe during August last year. responding to pop icon David Bowie's call for Scotland to stay with us, made at the Brit Awards in February 2014. Now, Bowie's was performative, including music, poetry and discussion, as well as audience participation. It was immediate, responding to the campaign as it unfolded, and it was very humorous and engaging. I went to quite a few of them and they were great. And it was encouraging discussion and debate through its performative structure. And though broadly pro-yes, it involved a large number of people prominent and active on both sides of the campaign. Bowie's includes, so the Bowie's donation to the National Library of Scotland includes born digital, analogue material as both published and unpublished, and you'll see some of that in the pillar cases outside. So you'll see we've got the visitor book, which has all of the people who came along and performed as part of Bowie's or spoke. We've got running order information, promotional postcards and leaflets, podcasts from each show, the website, which is quite comprehensive, and the Twitter profile. We also have a really nice record for audience participation. So each day there was a different theme for Bowie's, and the audience were asked to respond to that theme just on scraps of paper that we had, and to hand those in at the end. And those were collected. Now, they were collected by All Back to Bowie's organisers, who we'd spoken to before the event started, so they were interested in the historic nature of what they were doing, and they were interested in how the National Library of Scotland was engaging with this kind of collection. So they gave us all of this material, which sounds simple, but actually isn't, because if you'll notice there are at least 3 different formats of material there, but they gave us all this material for the referendum collection. So, the collection Bowie's here is relatively discreet, okay, it's not a big collection. Instead of 50 boxes representing the lifetime of an organisation or an individual, your more usual kind of archival situation, the referendum collection is comprised of many smaller collections and quite awkwardly shaped, strange collections donated by a wide range of individuals or groups. Bowie's is a good example of the kind of events that were created around the referendum, a large number of which were creative, at least as much as they were political, the two going hand in hand. Poetry readings, musical events, cake afternoons, and a whole range of creative activities combined with political discussion and conversation in a way that was certainly new for a generation, if not for all. In many cases, these events appear to have created platforms for those involved to explore new angles on or otherwise develop existing creative practices. Those who responded to the prompt of the referendum might include designers, those from the voluntary sector or from community and participatory arts, arts professionals trained with and existing within various art worlds that might be plastic, literary and performative, academics with interests in particular arts or the arts, artists who dip their toes in academia, and those existing outside of art worlds, intentionally or not. These groups and individuals whose members and affiliates are drawn from what may be called the creative sectors of society, who may hold a range of at times contrasting views on activist activity, came together to support the campaign for Scottish independence. The impact of this activity on a post-independence referendum Scotland has by now been articulated by many, and well expressed by Green activist, writer and artist Sarah Paterson in her recent blog post on Lanark, Creativity and the Cultural Cringe, noting the newly awakened citizenry in these post-referendum days. Further, this outcome of the referendum to push and reshape artistic inquiry may also be part of wider trends towards multiplicity in creative practice that I think was mentioned earlier. A trend noted by William Dersiewicz in the American magazine The Atlantic, describing a shift towards versatility in young creators, their tendency to construct a multiplicity of artistic identities. You're a musician and a photographer and a poet, a storyteller and a dancer and a designer. A multi-platform artist, technique or expertise is not the point. The point is versatility. So, though producing many of the same formats as more traditional campaign groups, those with high levels of creative input, however that might be quantified, might be seen to differ in various interesting ways. These differences may manifest structurally, being often quite particular, less likely to take a generic kind of group as an exemplar, and more likely to create a bespoke structure that fits more exactly a particular, probably shifting worldview, ethos or values. We've perhaps seen this most clearly with groups like National Collective and events like All Back to Bowie's, but also in loose consortiums such as the Poetry Society commissioned by the pro-union Hands Across the Border campaign, Brit Rocks Festival, and in the many individual voices and one-off events that have emerged during the campaign and after, including performers Lady Alba and the Independence Choir, events like the Big Vote, and courses in creative writing, such as Write Around the Referendum. In situations such as that we found ourselves in last year, in which the mechanisms of governance appear to be somewhat unveiled, and there is a chance for a much wider audience to become involved, the voices of artists often emerge to highlight what's uncovered, whether directly or more obliquely. The referendum campaign certainly prompted some artists, performers and other creatives to use the tools of these trades to promote their cause, as well as challenging the way that they worked. The kind of events described above don't really pose a greater or lesser problem for the archive. A creative social event is likely to be recorded in the same sorts of formats and at the same kinds of paces as a not-so-creative event. However, the bespoke structure of certain groups, coupled with a high degree of design skills, for example, in a short and fast campaign, where events happened off the cuff and planning may have been minimal, might mean that traditional forms of record-keeping are superseded. Instead of minutes and agendas, private Facebook groups might become the most obvious way to communicate. This kind of material is simply too sensitive to be donated, at least for now. Though as time passes, those involved might be more comfortable donating more private and unpublished material, the record of many groups formed around the referendum will likely be their public face: websites, films of public events, photographs, printed ephemera, rather than unpublished records, papers and emails, for example. While we are getting some of this, that's not the bulk of what people are offering, or necessarily even what they have. The underlying network that draws these issues together, of course, is the digital and online world. And it's been noted that the referendum has highlighted, or perhaps hastened, a shift in the production of material, in which the internet as a tool for dissemination has played a central role. The increasing volume of digital material and the possibilities for data sharing afforded by the internet have opened the archival community to greater collaborative possibilities, both between each other and record creators. It also creates a situation in which publishing is much more prevalent, many more voices can be heard, and as we saw with the referendum, politics begins to give way to the collective interests of diverse communities. At the same time, these advantages are offset by new risks. And here we come to a fundamental issue. For most of the material that was produced as part of the referendum, whether a blog, sticker, or video disseminated on the web, if we waited for 5 years, or perhaps even 5 months to collect, it's likely that most would be gone, or at least scattered so widely that it would be incredibly difficult to piece it back together again. Though the referendum was in some ways extraordinarily well documented, the emphasis was necessarily on the moment, the campaign. There's a very real concern that this material will simply disappear from hard drives and computers, and the software in which it was created will become obsolescent. In essence, digital material is much more vulnerable than traditional, which isn't to say that paper, particularly flyers, etc., and ephemeral material are not vulnerable, and they are. But digital presents us with an even greater set of challenges, and an even greater set of unknowns. Research, though estimates vary quite wildly, suggests that the average lifespan of a digital object is between 5 to 7 years, a website around 40 days. However much we debate those figures, and they are debated, this is clearly substantially shorter than the lifespan of a paper item, a well-cared-for paper item at least. So it's a practical issue, but also one of understanding. We've had hundreds of years to understand traditional materials and a much shorter amount of time to get to grips with digital by comparison. But beyond the practicalities of collecting digital, perhaps because the creative aspect of the referendum has become such a key narrative, and for the reasons I've already discussed, it's also highlighted distinctions between forms of creative culture as they engaged with the independence referendum, which has in turn shown up a potential issue for the archive. These forms of creative culture might be described as, on the one hand, those with more immediate practices that respond to the moment, and those whose practices are shaped by longer-term engagement with one or another threads of inquiry. This is by no means a hard and fast distinction, merely an observation. Examples of more immediate forms of engagement can be found in work like All Back to Bowie's and National Collective, as well as maybe the work of Adult Learning Project in Edinburgh and other established community groups and organisations. Examples of longer-term engagement, which might be more thin on the ground, might be exemplified by an exhibition at Stills Gallery held in August to October 2014, The King's Peace, Realism and War, and there's an image of it up there. Now this exhibition was directly intended to be a part of the referendum moment in Scotland, but it was not directed in any way towards the issues directly of the referendum, if that makes sense. But the intention was that it was to be on public view during this period when people of Scotland were deciding how to cast their vote. Another example might be the Shock of Victory, which opened last week at the Centre for Contemporary Arts. Of course, that's a different situation because they're reflecting now on the referendum 1 year on, and like many cultural organisations, didn't get involved so much in the debate as it was happening. But this Shock of Victory considers artistic approaches, techniques, provocations and motivations in a post-referendum reality. So it's considering the way that artistic practices were impacted by the referendum, but it's not directed towards the referendum exactly. And I think it takes a kind of broader, probably more global perspective on the referendum and what it means or could mean. For the archive, this is somewhat significant. As we're collecting the documentary record of the referendum, which as we've just seen is no small task, there's necessarily a focus on what can be clearly described as part of the Scottish Independence Referendum. In the quite necessary rush to collect what's immediate, digital, online and undeniably important, there is therefore an interesting dilemma. How do we allow for and predict the eventual significance of content that might have been produced in a less direct manner in a collecting environment necessarily, for the referendum at least, focused on collecting in the present, almost at the moment content is produced? Whilst we may be able to practically keep up with the technological and cultural changes that the referendum has certainly been a part of, in such a fast-changing collecting landscape, there are inevitably more unknowns than knowns. For the National Library of Scotland, there are various answers to such questions. Most importantly is that I work within a broad network of colleagues who engage with the collection of material from a much broader cultural perspective, including specialisms in political and literary manuscripts, printed material from Scottish communities and organisations, moving image, the arts, official publications. If something is not directly of the referendum, a record of the event is likely to be collected through one of these channels as part of the library's daily work. The issue then becomes one of discovery, of making accessible what we have through cataloguing and description, and working across different organisations, as we have with the Referendum Distributed Network, where we've tried to find out who's collecting referendum material within Scotland and keep in touch about who has what where and how to help people access it. To make findable and accessible what we have. Another answer is to promote self-archiving of digital as well as analogue material from within communities of practice. And this is something I hope we'll see more of in coming years. This could be anything from learning how to make your website more archivable, to considering how your computer filing system might impact future preservation of your documents. We, certainly I, have learned a great deal from working on the referendum collection. And there is much to consider for the future. Key to this is the role of record producers in the writing of their own histories. How will the referendum be remembered? What will the archive show? Where are the silences and gaps in the collection? And what will they say about the National Library of Scotland, but also of those who produced the material? How can we ensure that people are aware of what's needed to archive what they create, so that there is a choice and an element of control? Artists of whatever kind, though they might affiliate with politics, are likely to also hold other, more broadly cultural or more narrowly artistic considerations when considering a political campaign such as the referendum. These ideals might at times be complementary, but they might also come into conflict. One of the great strengths of the referendum was its diversity of voices and skillful use of web platforms to provide spaces for those voices, connecting the digital with the physical world. For the archive, such structural complexity provides a free-flowing and constantly changing story, which requires new approaches and a rethinking of what, how and why we collect, but also who does the collecting. And that's me. Thank you. If anyone has any questions?
Suppose I was a student in future years and I read in a book that there were certain important events in the course of the campaign. It might be the march to the top of Calton Hill, or George Osborne's very helpful intervention when he made clear what the Treasury thought about currency union, or the world-famous egg attack on a certain politician whose name escapes me. Suppose I wanted to see how different people reported on that. Would I be able to go to your archive and compare and contrast the different newspapers, their account of these things, what Al Jazeera said about it as opposed to the BBC, and so on, to compare and contrast? Or is that something that I could not do?
Well, you could do that to an extent. I mean, it would take time and effort. It's not that you could come to the archive and I could make it happen instantly. Although some parts of the collection would be easier than others. With a web collection, you could certainly make searches for the things you were interested in, and you would find the press associated with whatever example you were interested in. You would also be able to search for the ephemeral collection to see if there was any printed leaflets or flyers or anything to do with the event. And the newspaper collections, you could certainly use those. I mean, one of the things about the referendum collection is that it doesn't actually exist. It's distributed across the library, so we collect it and we try to tag it so that it's findable through various cataloguing aids as part of the referendum collection, but it doesn't sit within one kind of box in the library. And the reason for that is that because of the different formats involved, we have to. Some of it has to sit within the moving image collection, some of it sits within the manuscript collection, some of it sits within the print collection, some of it sits within the web collection. So it's quite a complex thing that's there. And you would have to navigate it and learn how to navigate the different parts. But yes, I think you could find quite a lot.
Alistair wants to know if you've got the egg.
But I wish someone had asked me if we could have the egg.
Very great. If that's all the questions, thank you so much again, Amy.